Good morning. Hi. Perhaps we could begin the festivities. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for this Leadership Symposium, co-hosted by the Century Club Business Series and Owens Bauer Leadership Centre. And I appreciate you being here to support your school and the 2018 Distinguished Alumni Award honorees. As you've probably seen, the campus is bustling, and we're delighted to have many of our alumni back on campus to celebrate alumni achievement and our vibrant Olin community. We look forward to the Distinguished Alumni Awards and Dinner Gala tonight. I think you say gala, I say gala. We hope to see all of you again this evening, where today's panellists will be formally recognised for their accomplishments. This weekend is always a special time to be on campus, and we're pleased to celebrate with each of you. Now, we have just one special announcement before we proceed to the symposium. Before our students become alumni who impact the world through their business achievements, and there are some great examples here today, but they're taught by our world-class faculty. And therefore, I think it's appropriate at this juncture to also recognise the importance of Olin faculty, their research, and its impact on business practice. So today I have the great honour of announcing the winners of this year's Olin Award for Faculty Research that Impacts Business. And this is the 11th anniversary of this award that was conceived, created, and generously funded by Dick Mahoney, our distinguished executive in residence, who is a wonderful member of our community and has been very welcoming and very, very helpful to me in my first few hundred days, maybe 500 days on Saturday, as Dean here. And Dick is, as you know, was Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Monsanto. And I think he came to the conclusion a few years ago that our faculty were doing excellent research, but he felt that few chief executive officers or managers could make heads or tails of what they were saying, or what they were writing, at least, for academic journals. And therefore, his view was that there should be a movement to encourage our faculty to translate their research into language that non-academic business people could understand, apply, and perhaps have a real impact. And so that's been extremely important for us, as what a part of our vision for the school is to produce world-class education, research, and impact. So Dick was really a visionary, and we're grateful for his thoughts and for his generosity. And thanks to Dick Mahoney's encouragement, faculty have been submitting relevant and rigorous research papers to the Olin Award competition for 11 years now. And I like to talk about Dick's accomplishments and generosity and vision at this time, because he so humbly has not called this the Dick Mahoney Award, it is the Olin Award, but I like to recognise his vision in creating that. So this year, the judges have selected research by Ling Dong, Professor of Operations and Manufacturing Management, and Durai Sundramurthy, Senior Lecturer in Management. Their paper is entitled Machine Learning-Based Simulation and Optimization of Soybean Variety Selection. And it's a lot punchier than the title suggests. And we now, in fact, have a brief video to introduce you to their research.
This is the 11th year of the Olin Award, which recognizes research which has the greatest opportunity to affect business results. And this year's winner, I'm very happy to announce, Ling Dong and Dara Sundramurthy. And the paper is called Machine Learning-Based Simulation and Optimization of Soybean Variety Selection.
We are simulating the growth of soybean varieties under different weather conditions.
We're going to use those simulated results to help us formulate an optimization problem, pretty much like investors' portfolio optimization problem. And the solution of that optimization will give a tailored recommendation for the farmer to select a number of seeds for his or her farm.
This process has been named SimSoy by the authors, and they've done a wonderful job of making this an easy-to-use process in a very complex system.
So this research allows us also to develop a web application for the farmers to evaluate the performance of any given soybean, to help them make better decisions in terms of the yield of their crops.
Already the indications are using this methodology, they could increase the yield by 3 or 4 bushels per acre. Food shortage is a big problem. Nearly 800 million people all over the world do not have enough food. We want to solve, or at least take a step forward towards solving the food crisis. So increasing the yield is possible using this framework.
So please join me in welcoming Ling and Dorai to the stage for the presentation of the $10,000 Olin Award and a sculpture designed by Dick Mahoney. Congratulations. Congratulations. So, why don't you stand either side? There we go. Hold it. Well done. Thanks. So now it's my very great pleasure to introduce our Alumni Award honorees. On our panel this morning, we have 4 outstanding executives to share their experiences and knowledge as leaders. Zach Boyers earned his MBA in 2001. Zach is the chairman and chief executive officer at US Bancorp Community Development Corporation. Shirley Cunningham completed her MBA in 2008 and serves as the executive vice president, AG Business and Enterprise Strategy at CHS Incorporated. Munir Mashukla is a 1998 graduate of the MBA program, and he's the founder and chairman at Synergies Worldwide. Rich Ritholtz completed his undergraduate degree at Olin in 1984, and he is partner, senior portfolio manager, and head of global commodities trading at Alliott Management Corporation. Leading our discussion today is Professor Kurt Dirks, who is the Bank of America Professor of Managerial Leadership and co-director of the Bauer Leadership Center here at Olin. The mission of the Bauer Leadership Center is to create knowledge about best practices in values-centered leadership, to educate and inspire the next generation of values-centered leaders, and transform how businesses think about and practice leadership. A defining characteristic of the Bauer Leadership Center is its emphasis on cultivating leaders who measure success both in what they achieve for their organizations and also how they impact their communities and society through the values and ethics that they demonstrate. And a key part of our new strategic vision for the school going forward is an identity that says that we are data-driven but values-based, so strongly analytical but in a strong values-based framework. And the Bauer Leadership Center is really center of that strategic mission for the school. So please join me in welcoming our panelists and Professor Kurt Dirks to the stage.
Well, welcome everyone. Good morning, how are you? And let me first congratulate each of our award winners. What a great example each of you are for our students who are here now, for the alums who have gone before you, and inspiration to us for what we all can be. Today we'd like to talk a little bit about this notion of leadership and get a sense for the careers that our winners have had and the values that have shaped them and some of the lessons that we can all take from them. So what I think we'll do maybe is talk a little bit about your careers and maybe have you start with that. And as part of that, maybe share we have a class we call Defining Moments, Lessons in Leadership. And so I'd like to do, as part of kind of your introduction of yourself, is to talk, where are you at now? Or what is your most recent role? And maybe share a defining moment in your career that shaped your leadership style and where you are today. So, Richard, you know the danger of sitting closest to the faculty members. Sometimes you get asked first. So I'm going to ask you to start to talk a little bit about your career and then share a defining moment in your career.
Actually, it's funny. You said 1984, I guess, in the introduction. I was like, wow, that sounds like a long time ago. So perhaps I'm old enough now to be distinguished. So there you go. Yeah, look, I've had a long and diverse career. I probably won't go into too many of the details. You can read that in the bio if you want, because it'll probably take up too much time. But defining moments. So I've been in commodities trading for about 30 years. When I answer one of your questions later after seeing this SimSoy video, you're going to see why I'm going to retire soon, because obviously machine learning is changing the business quite a lot. But putting that aside, you know, when I first try to learn the business, it's a challenging business to learn, and it takes a lot more time than maybe intuitively you would think. And I definitely relied on a number of mentors, and one in particular, Tony Annunziato in Houston. You know, we sat down probably about 26 years ago, so I was probably about 4 years into my career, and he really taught me the importance of leadership, communication, feedback, and then alignment of incentives. Alignment of incentives between yourself and the investors that are investing with you. And it really resonated with me, and I've carried that throughout my career to the point where, you know, I can always say to an investor, look, you would never be in a position that I don't have myself, and I'm not feeling it. This whole concept of other people's money, and you know, you've kind of seen movies and read books about it, that does not exist in my realm, and I do believe that that's the way to lead and manage well. So I think that was really a defining moment for myself.
Well, it's great, and I know you also mentioned mentorship, and I know you do a lot of support for our students, particularly when they come to New York, and so we definitely appreciate that as being something that we hope all of our students as they leave can follow your model on that.
Thank you.
Great. Samir.
Well, first of all, a lot of things I say and learn, I plagiarize. But I'm not ashamed of that. But what I'm good at is recycling. So I'm a very conscious plagiarizer, so I recycle. So I know this is being podcast, but most of the people on the podcast have watched Netflix and whatever else they do after Netflix, so they're not listening to what I have to say, and the rest are doing Snapchatting, so they're not going to listen to what I'm going to say.
In good shape.
So again, I learned recently that pressure is a privilege. This was said by a tennis star, and champions modify. These two things resonate because most of my defining moments have emerged after a crisis. And they again say chaos, crisis, chaos, there's order emerges after chaos. So most of the times in my most difficult moments came out the best moment. And what I do for a living, or I used to do, I'm in the supply chain management business, which before was called agency business. It was called trading. But now with the way margins are, people hire you just for your expertise so that they know how to get stuff which we get at Walmart or TJ Maxx or Costco. And how do you get it, how fast you get it, and how cheap you get it. I'm not in the disposable business, so just getting it there. Most of the experiences which I'm going through right now, I stepped down from the CEO's position and I became chairman. I didn't like the term, so I called myself custodian. And from the custodian of synergies on July 1st, I will be moving into a holding company and working with other verticals in the same space, but addressing different customer bases. The challenge or issues which we may talk about is running traditional companies today. At the same time, within traditional companies, we have to run startups. And that is a big challenge. And HR is a big challenge. And the reason is that Apple has to hire people with music and art. And you can't apply the same employment standards or compensation standards. And I'm actually trying to spend a lot of time with millennials. It's excruciatingly painful. I have 3 myself. And with startups, I've recently exited from a media company, which I got outvoted because of millennials. We did well. It's public information. So I'm in a learning process, even at 54, on how to deal with the current generation and the needs of the aging population, who people are forgetting. And we'll talk about reskilling, hopefully, in the next questions.
That's good. You talked about defining moments coming in times of crisis. Is there one crisis that stood out in your career that you'd like to share?
Yes, in, I think, 1995, a year before I went into MBA, things were kind of looking good for me. And I was in a good executive position at one place, and I had a small business going. And I lost both. One because of maybe my attitude, which I still ask the millennials to leave home when they come out. And the other was on fundamentals of culture. I'm a big proponent of culture. So it made me rethink, and I think I came out a better person, a better entrepreneur. And like I said, I plagiarized Champions Modify. I put that title on myself, and I moved on.
Well, I think that's a great example. One thing I know we hear very frequently from the most successful people is how that continuous learning cycle, and learning often comes from those tough times. So I think that's a great emphasis on that.
Totally.
Shirley.
So I have ag business, which is commodity trading business as well as fertilizer for CHS. But I also have a pretty unusual role because I have strategy as well for the company, and I have market and communications, so a little bit different type of role. My defining moment wasn't in 1995, it was 1998. I ran a group of, for information technology of about 40, and I was asked to move to Brussels in Belgium through a mentor, and I went from 40 to 400, 1998, Y2K, wrong technology, wrong skill set, and a lot of change. So that really took my experience base from being this narrow to being really, really broad. And that was one of my defining moments. I moved country. I had a 14-year-old that was very unhappy with me for about 6 months. But it was a wonderful experience, and that was one of my defining moments.
What was the key for you making it through that process? In fact, just in the class, I know I actually see some of the students from that class. We talk about going through these stretch assignments. What was the key for making it through that stretch assignment? New country, new place, family, all those dynamics.
I had the right support structure I was Monsanto. So I had the right support structure to be able to make the change. So my boss was very supportive. The people around me that recognized that change needed to happen. And as tough as it was, because it was a restructuring, and I've been through many of them, I had the right people supporting the type of change that I was trying to make.
Oh, great. We'll come back to this notion of international assignments in international experience in just a moment, so hold on to that piece. Zach.
Yeah, thanks. I'm thinking about some of the other responses, and I'm also sort of under the belief that defining moments, for me at least, happen all the time. I mean, they seem to happen in a one-on-one conversation that I'm having with someone that I work with, or a customer, or just in many ways, and I know that sounds overly dramatic in certain respects, but the reality is that it gives me certain kinds of illumination at times that I might not otherwise expect. I run a subsidiary of U.S. Bank that is sort of a business in a business. It's particularly focused in community and economic development. And we've grown a lot over the past 10 or 15 years. And so actually, while there's some good breadth of sort of global experiences that are here on the stage, the defining moment that I thought I might speak to is actually remarkably local. I started at a very small bank that has since been bought 3 times. It is now U.S. Bank, which is the 5th largest bank in the country. But very early on in my career, just really a few years into it, I'm an accidental banker. I never planned this, frankly, 25 years later. But I was in St. Louis. I found myself here, having moved here after college. And if you were here in the mid-1990s in St. Louis, you may know that the downtown area was largely empty. Many of the buildings were vacant. And in fact, you couldn't find a cup of coffee on a Saturday really anywhere in downtown St. Louis. And being in the business of community development, I had an opportunity to meet some real visionary, pioneering people who wanted to revitalize and put these buildings back into use and turn them into something. They had been told no by 8 or 9 different banks in a row locally, and at the same time, there were some new tools made available, sort of capital tools, different ways to structure transactions and deals. And I found myself able to, in fact, with support and help and all kinds of mentors, put a deal together, and really a couple of deals together, to get the ball and the momentum rolling. The reason that was defining for me, candidly, was a couple. One is it sort of gave me a sense of a way in which I might be able to impact the world, perhaps on a localized basis, but that was very exciting to me and defining. And also, it gave me a sense of really a more intimate sense of what I was passionate about, what was going to drive me, what was going to move me, and that opportunity was compelling for that reason.
Well, let me just follow up on that then, just thinking about students who are coming through now, and as you said, that kind of gave you a sense of what you are passionate about. Is there anything from that experience that you would get our students to think about situations to either put themselves in or to reflect on to help them kind of understand this notion of passion, which I think is such an important part of our careers?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's something there. There are, for example, in my field of work, there are a lot of people who want to make important impacts in the world. Some of them don't want to be a step removed, as I am, or as we are, and enabling that through financial structuring, right, essentially. So one of the key things that at least I would advise people to consider is how do you want to spend your actual day? Right? I mean, there's the sort of the goal, and there's the sense of mobility and career development that I think all of us are pursuing in different ways. But there's a critical piece of that, which is how are you going to spend the 10 or 12 hours a day that you're working at those efforts? And I think getting in touch with that, getting realistic about that, on your way to finding what moves you is just a critical learning.
That's great. Thank you. Well, let me shift to a couple questions that are related to Olin very closely now. So Dean Taylor mentioned that one of the kind of centerpieces of the vision going forward is this notion of being values-based. And what I'm curious about is to have you talk about what are the personal values that you have had that really kind of shape your decisions, your career, your life. What are those values? Where did they come from? And is there an example that you have for us about maybe how it impacted some key decisions that you have along the way? And so, Richard, we'll let you off the hook first this time. We'll put Munir on the hot seat first this time.
From my recycling basket, it has to start on the top. So again, something we had put on our website was that reputation is what other people think of you, and character is what you are. So values, I think it's abused. It's used at places where it's not supposed to be used. And unfortunately, what we've seen, that we've respected institutions, people in this part of the world, other parts of the world, only to realize that it was all BS. So I do not want to be, I don't wear a robe, so I don't think people who wear robes, and I'm referring to religion, they talk about values and then we hear stories. So I like to keep that on the side a little bit and come back to culture. And creating a culture, it takes years. And within that, there is some part where you can inject values. And by injecting those values at the right time, if you have the right culture. So if I'm a drug dealer and I've given the wrong drug and somebody dies, I should be responsible, even if I'm a drug dealer. So there's values depending on what you're doing. Culture is important because without that, you cannot pre-populate an organization with what you think. And that's why it has to start on the top. And two things which I try to practice when I hire people is, yes, contracts are important. I have more contracts now than my earlier part of my career. But I do start with the notion that we need to trust people, not police people. So that gives the people in your team and in your organization a feeling that you're trusted, you're not being policed. Anybody who comes with any suggestions of we should have this to check the people, I said, then you're going to break the trust. The other is respecting people throughout your hierarchy. And even if sometimes in my career, a very senior person has misbehaved with someone junior, I've made sure the senior person is fired. It sends a message. So they are these things with empathy, trust, which can then go back to values and what you really are. But till I go 6 feet under, I don't think anyone has the authority or myself to speak about values.
And where did you learn, or where did you come to have this belief about the importance of culture and particularly issues of respect, trusting other people, et cetera? Where do you think that came from? I'm curious.
I think that, again, from one of the movies of Robin Williams, he said that if you don't learn from history, you will always remain a child. So what we do not do is do not learn. I can't read books. The only books I read is my curriculum books. But I can read magazines, I can read on the web, I can read quotes. As you can see, I use a lot of quotes.
Yes.
So the most important thing is that there's things happening in front of you. We just do not. And Mike Gardiner, he used to be my statistics professor, some of you may remember. He said, one thing I remember, and I've used it 100 times with different places, that if you go in a casino, and if everybody loses, and the slot machine rings, you'll go deaf. So we only hear about the people who win, not the people who lose. We forget. We talk about startups doing well and the valuation. We don't commemorate the demises. We don't commemorate the losses. We try not to learn. We don't have case studies, case after case studies about the screw-ups. Which companies have done. So, and then you can do that. And I'm a big follower of Munger, more than Buffett. And I can tell you stories which I know firsthand of even recently someone who expired, one of their CEOs. And prior to that, they had a church service in Nebraska and Omaha. And Munger and Buffett were there for 2 hours with the family before the person expired. That communicates something. There are 21 people who work in Omaha in that office, or maybe 22. So you can learn, but how many times do the millennials or the next generation we're talking about Munger and Buffett? We don't talk about that. It's just how well they've performed,
right?
But not what the values and culture they do in a small. I mean, you talk about downtown St. Louis. Go to downtown Omaha. It's horrible, like our president would say. It's terrible. So I'm even learning new vocabulary from our president. So.
Well, what I like about what you said, which I think is a great lesson, it's not only kind of what you achieve, but how you get there, the values underlying, which provide that long-term sustainable success, but also, I think, set a culture, right? Which, as the saying goes, right? Culture eats strategy for lunch. You have a great plan, but the culture at the end is going to drive that success. Shirley, talk a little bit about some of the values that have gone throughout your career.
Culture and integrity are really important to me. And I've been really lucky to work for two great companies that hold those beliefs. But I did work for a company that didn't. It was a very blame-orientated culture, and I very quickly realized I couldn't work in that culture because I'm a problem solver. And so I actually only lasted 12 months with that company. And then, of course, moved on to another great company. So culture and integrity are really important to me. I will leave a job if I feel that I don't have that environment.
Mm-hmm. And where did that come? Where did those values come for you? Where did they arise from? Just something you learned over time, or
I have a very traditional Scottish upbringing.
Yes.
In an environment where my parents set those types of standards as children, and that belief system is how I grew up, and it's the type of environment my parents created.
And so as you try to pass that on, not only to perhaps your kids, but also get the people who have worked with you, for you, how have you gone about trying to pass those lessons on?
You know, I create an environment where there is a lot of coaching between the folks that work for me, and as part of that coaching, we go through what are your values, how do you think about values. Our business today operates in environments that's really, really tough, especially in emerging markets. So you want to make sure that there's a lot of thought put into things like compliance and the regulatory system, especially if you work in the commodity space. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of education, a lot of coaching, a lot of seeing how people behave.
So this goes into the discussions that you're having and on a regular basis about that. That's great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the issue of values in an organization is just absolutely profoundly important. I think I'm a bit of I'm going to say critic in that I think too many organizations sort of really spend a lot of time getting their purpose statement right and identifying their values, and don't spend a ton of time really defining what they mean, how they show up in an operating model, how that ought to, and in fact, how we might performance manage around how those values show up between people in an organization. I had a great opportunity to develop a friendship and relationship with another alum from WashU, Leslie Peters, who helped me understand in some fundamental way values are not sort of about what you want to do next, but who you want to be. And the ways in which that needs to be sort of ever present in the thinking about how you conduct yourself and how you are with your colleagues and with the people who might work for you or next to you, or really even how you want to show up in the world. And as someone who's a husband and has kids and whatever, that those who you want to be in some ways is critical. So we have our values, and the question really becomes is what do they mean in practice and in your operating model in your business?
I think that's a great point. So we have that discussion here at Olin, is thinking about, so we have 5 values hanging up on banners you may notice as you walk into the atrium. And as one of my faculty colleagues said, well, you go to any business school, those are values which you see on there. So what's the differentiating? And it becomes that, right? How do you live those on a day-to-day basis? How do you make them come alive? And that's the challenge we're working on now under Dean Taylor's direction. So look for that and help us with that. Rich.
Okay, so in my business, it's investing. It's working for a hedge fund is where I've been the last 20 or so years. Our assets walk in and out the door every day. So for me, the value basis is the absolute backbone of everything that I've been able to do, building a team. And really around that, first and foremost, integrity. I mean, you have one shot to lose your integrity, and then it's gone. You'll never get it back. And people just will not trust you. Respect, empathy, empowerment, and then ultimately, most important, teamwork. We have to work together. We will be better if we work together effectively. And I don't care how talented someone is, if they don't align with some of the core values that I talked about previously, I won't hire them. Okay, I feel like ultimately the team is what it's about. That will make us strongest. And really, to me, the values are the backbone of everything that I do and everything that I've been able to achieve and build over time.
And so where did those values come through in your situation? How did those arise?
Even though I did graduate in 1984 and I actually have an MBA as well from another institution, the beginning part of my career was largely as an investor, and then probably the second half of it has been with teams, and I just kind of figured it out over time. I just it wasn't easy, but and believe me, I made plenty of mistakes along the way, but I just really understood, and maybe it came a bit from team sports when I was younger, but I understood that the team working together ultimately will make us strongest and most successful. And then I kind of just work backwards and try to figure out like what we need in order to engender that type of teamwork and spirit and camaraderie.
Yep.
And fortunately, it's worked out.
So back to Zach's point, how do you make those come alive then in work? So to create that team dynamic, at ILIAD, how do you do that?
It's interesting when I was listening to some of the other answers because, I think I'm very fortunate. My team is two different teams I run, and it's 40, front office professionals.
Yeah.
It's not that big. I think when you start talking about organizations that are hundreds or thousands of people, disseminating that value orientation becomes much more difficult.
Yep.
I mean, I live it every day because I'm right there.
Right.
And, I'm co-working with everybody. And really that empathy, empowerment, respect also just at the core. But it's pretty easy for me to live it and execute it because the team isn't that big.
Because you're right there, yeah.
Yeah.
Before we turn to the audience, one more question. So one of the other pieces of Dean Taylor's vision is this notion of being global, the importance of being global, having global perspective. And I know most of you have that kind of global piece in your background. So how did that impact you in your career? What advice do you have for our students about thinking about injecting that into their career? So Shirley, obviously you have had that in a couple roles.
I would say it makes you think more broadly. It makes you think in a more rounded way. If you think about the globe as the opportunity versus just a narrow strip. And I think that even you learn things culturally. For example, I trailed my husband to different countries. He had to learn different languages. He gave up jobs. He joined an organization called STUD. He added an S to it. It's Spouses Trailing Under Duress Successfully. So culturally, you learn a lot as you think about that global type of experience. And so it's just been certainly added a lot of depth to my experience base in my career. But it's just a massive opportunity when you think like that and think more broadly.
Great. Munir, obviously you started global and have been through that across your career.
To put it briefly, I heard the president or CEO of Bain. She said that the current and the next CEO, the CEOs have to be CEO of an ecosystem, not CEO of an asset or a P&L. And in that ecosystem, the stakeholders in the traditional have changed. Globalization, it's not just a buzzword. I think a lot of people are asking, what is tariff today? But it can impact you. Then we have environmental issues, which if you are not paying attention to can be your worst nightmare as a CEO or as an entrepreneur. And all this have a global footprint. So you just cannot be a leader or a manager or having skills without understanding how things work around the world and the different emerging markets and some of the world powers. So we, of course, deal with it on an hourly basis,
Right.
because in supply chain, it can dramatically affect us.
So even if you're not a global company, it's still, you have to understand how it can impact you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rich, I think early in your career, you had some global experience in your career. What role did that play in your career, and does it still play a role in your career?
Huge, and yes. Look, I don't want to overstate it, but I think there's a reasonable chance I wouldn't necessarily be sitting here today had I not had the 6 years living and working abroad. When I was working with Mobil Oil, I was actually in 4 different countries in Europe, England, Italy, Norway, and Holland. It just opens your mind up. It forces you to think differently. Look, you can look in the audience, and we're not so U.S.-born centric anymore in business. But look, I was born in the New York area. I pretty much grew up. I went out to St. Louis, which I guess was my biggest move when I was relatively young. But then all of a sudden, you're in the global world, and you can be pretty isolated, especially in the U.S., if you let yourself be. And it was just fascinating experience to me, being in different cultures, learning about the cultures, being forced to assimilate, understanding how people thought about things differently, the problem solving was different, the culture was different, in a lot of cases the language was different, and it really opened up my mind. And then from there, from that experience, is when I actually went in 1998 and started my own business, which was a commodity trading advisor, which ultimately I was able to roll into Elliott and started the group there in 2005. But without the experience of that internationalization, I just don't think I would have thought about things with as open a mind as I was able to. And I'm not so sure I would have been as successful. I really think it's a phenomenal experience. And on a go-forward basis, it's even more critical. The world has become a very small place, especially with technology. And I just think any young student really needs to understand technology and needs to understand globalization. I just feel like you're going to be going into the fight with one arm tied behind your back if you don't have those things and a deep understanding. So really go abroad, just do anything and everything you can to get a better appreciation of what the world is all about and how people think about things.
Yeah, living abroad certainly is, people often cite that transformative experience in their career and their life, changes perspective, changes trajectory on that. Now, Zach, your sphere of impact has been more local, but do you see globalization even and having this global perspective as part of that?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, no question about it. We're a national organization. We don't do anything internationally. U.S. Bank has some presence in other parts of the world, but not huge. And yet, I think we are significantly influenced by a couple of factors. One is the technology and the pace of change, and that is a global phenomenon, and that is impacting every one of our industries, and will continue to. I think that pace of change is more dramatic and really robust, even just in the last 12 months, than it was in the last 12 years. It's just, and that is a global phenomenon that I think all of us need to understand and embrace. The other thing is that as the world is shrinking, really the competition for talent and for diverse talent from all over the world is a driving factor and a critical issue for every company, really, in the United States and elsewhere in the world. So I think, to me, those are the things that even a national sort of concentrated organization need to really get their hands around and understand the dynamics.
The dynamics on that. One more question before I go to the audience. We have such a diverse panel here. Let's take advantage of that diversity to understand what's going on in business today. So it'd be great to hear from you about what's one of the most critical things that's going on in your industry right now that we should all be thinking about. And Zach, I start with you. I'm going to start with you this time. What's going on right now in your industry that you want the audience to think about?
Well, so I mean, I guess I might stay on the pace of change. I will say that particularly the last couple of days with Mark Zuckerberg on the stand, if you will, information security for banks is a gigantic area of focus, and it is there's no question it's a critical risk. There are thousands of attacks on large banks every day trying to get at our information, and so that is not an area that I have particular oversight or responsibility for, but it is a critical issue for our industry. Beyond that, though, I would say, and many of you probably have these experiences and know, that banks to some significant degree are dinosaurs and are competing with one another. When really, in some critical ways, our biggest competitor might be Amazon or Facebook or Google, and we need to start thinking that way. We're actually probably late to that thinking. The pace of change is legitimate, and companies, banks in particular, are somewhere between mediocre and good at making incremental change. We are not particularly great at making transformational change, and so I think there's a real opportunity and risk if we don't see that. One thing I will say that I wanted to mention as it relates to culture, in an environment where the pace of change is what it is now, trying to figure out how to hold on, preserve, invest in culture while responding to those incredible shifts, sort of tectonic shifts in what customers expect, what our employees expect. Thinking about all of that in that context is a real challenge, and I think it's a new day for culture in some respects if we want to maintain what's gotten us here.
That's interesting. Talk a little bit about what you meant about Amazon or Facebook being the new potentially new competitor to banks and what that means.
Well, I mean, it's most sort of basic. It's that there's just disruption coming from all kinds of fintechs, but also larger companies looking at, like Amazon, I think, looking at sort of different ways to move money fundamentally. But even bigger and more broader than that, it's skipping all of the steps. It's a way it's a way of thinking about this is the way we do what we do today, and really are we able to, and customer demands are suggesting I want to click, I want it on my phone, I want it when I want it. If I've been a customer of U.S. Bank for 10 years, why does it take 3 weeks to get a loan approval, right? It should take 3 minutes. Given data and the power of information and the fact that I'm well known to the company. And so, those are in the old days, we'd say it takes 3 weeks, we should make it 2.5, right? But that's not going to get you there. It's got to take 3 minutes. And that's really a shift in thinking that requires a shift in how we do everything, how we empower people, how we use data and technology, how we allocate capital, how we think about our strategy. And so that's the path that we're on. But it's, like I said, it's a challenge to think about how you preserve a culture that got you here while those kinds of changes are being made.
Come on, those values become pretty key at that point, right?
Yeah, they really do.
Richard, talk a little bit about what's going on in your business, commodities business, trading business that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, so for me, I think the number one thing that is an issue going forward is this rapid push towards technology. I mean, it's really a fascinating time, and it's something that I can't really think of too many parallels historically, but when it comes to actually pure, like if I want to hire a computer scientist, right? I'd rather have the 22-year-old than the 27-year-old. I'd rather have the 27-year-old than the 32-year-old, right? Just because they grew up with it, they're more adept, and it's a fascinating, situation because it's almost counterintuitive, right? I mean, experience usually is worth something, right? But in this field, it's not. So on one hand, we have this push towards technology. You have the young people very fluent in it, and it's almost accelerating by the day. We talked about the machine learning aspect of it, but really, influencing financial markets in a big way, artificial intelligence, algorithms. On the other side, you have people like me with gray hair who have a lot of experience and do have a deep understanding of risk.
Right.
So you have that there, but we don't really understand the technology that well,
Right.
like the core of it, right? So we're relying on these 22-year-olds who don't really understand risk at all,
Right.
Because they don't really have the experience, and that's where experience is gathered over the years. So that's really where we're at now. And to be frank, it's I think it's a bit of a threat to our stability. I mean, kind of coming out post 08, which was a horrible correction and very, very painful. You know, the market's pretty much gone up for like 10 years in a row, right? You've had a few quick corrections, and if you notice, the pace of those corrections have been pretty quick, the duration pretty short. And I think that's been accelerated by technology and computers, accelerating moves, looking for weak hands, probing, but then it's come back. So it hasn't been a real threat to the stability of our system yet, but that doesn't mean that'll always be the case going forward. So that's the biggest issue I see right now, is this rapid push towards technology, and I think it's all good, but at the same time, it potentially could lead to stability, because the more experienced people who are really managing the risk aren't the ones that really understand that business that well.
Well, so that's a fascinating problem. I know we've talked about that here at Olin a little bit, on how you bridge these two different sets of expertise, two different sets of perspectives. Do you have any advice for how we should, how is your company doing that? How are you seeing people do that well? Because there is some sense of a trust question. Does this other group know what they're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's just always think independently, always ask yourself, even if you don't understand all the details of the technology, does this make sense to you? And then, as I mentioned before, I do think that people like myself who've been around 30 years, you're not going to make it to 30 years if you don't understand risk. And that's where you really have to deploy risk management. I mean, risk management becomes critical on a go-forward basis, because it's impossible to predict the future, but the situation I see potentially could lead to some instability at some point. So I think you always have to be thinking, regardless of what your business is, okay, what's my best case is always nice to think about, but what we spend a lot of time thinking about is what our worst case or some of our worst cases look like, and how do we protect against that?
Interesting. Okay. Munir.
First of all, I agree with most of the things which are discovered right now. I'm just going to give a little more gloomier picture. In different baskets, and my percentages could be off, but it's very difficult to verify. But I've heard that in 10 years, 40% of our workforce who are above 40 will not have jobs. So let's take that as a hyperbolic statement, but there is some value in that. There is talk about expert generalists being trained, that schools need to train people as expert generalists. That does not mean we don't need engineers, but we don't know in the next 10 years what kind of jobs. So we've been educating for jobs where we'll need to educate for skills. At the same time, AI is going to destroy our lives. But it's a reality. A year ago, everybody used to talk about Airbnb and Uber and this and which company? Blockchain is going to destroy them. And this is only a year ago. You go to any seminar and they used to talk about that. So this is scary. Scary for educational institutions. What are they going to teach? Huge issue of reskilling. In 31 years, one of the values is that I've never hired to fire, always hired to grow. But now when we see the payroll cost of some of those functions, on some of those people, I don't know what to do with them. And they don't want to have the ability or the openness to go and reskill themselves. It's not very easy. So you go from someone working in Alabama and at a hosiery plant earning $25 to paper and plastic. So we see employment, but we also see underemployment. Underemployment is a huge issue coming from lack of reskilling. And the startups, majority of the startups, and we had this forum in our YPO recently, are not thinking about the aging population. They are thinking about what's the next thing. We are not going to walk around naked with an app on our private parts. We are not going to be eating app for breakfast. It's just how that is delivered to us. But nobody's thinking about that aging population. And it's scary because we are going to deal with depression, suicide, and I find that that's the doom and gloom.
So that doom and gloom is coming from this notion that 40%, we'll throw that out there, maybe unemployed, underemployed because of technology.
And in our business, just to complete the question,
Yes.
it is talent. It's very, very difficult because we have to have new tools to hire talent right now. And that's a big challenge for us because the smart ones, people who think they're smart may not be smart for us, but people who we think are smart, their requirements could be absurd. And then we have to swallow the bitter pill and have flexibility. So we have two kinds of pools. I call them hire a mercenary, which means pay them what they want, get the work, get them out of here. And then I don't care about their values or whatever, as long as I can suck their brains. And then you have the traditional way where you want those people to grow in your company. And to conclude, even the word global or vision, I have to go not with the Wikipedia or dictionary word of moonshot, but we don't say vision. We have to look global, the Elon Musk version of. It's insane, but it's fascinating at the same time.
Interesting, surely.
I think part of the opportunity in our business is technology, whether it's things like precision ag or sensors that are out there, or soy sim, for example. There's a huge opportunity in that technology space in agriculture. The challenge that we face right now, quite frankly, is the administration. So thinking about that soybean demand in China, which is the largest soybean demand in the world for US beans. So part of the challenges for us are some of the things that the administration are considering and the uncertainty of that.
So how do you manage through that uncertainty of where obviously the administration right now is a little bit unpredictable? How does the company manage with that unpredictability?
I'm going to ask you for an answer to that. So,
Professors ask questions, they don't answer. That's right.
It's really difficult. We do some war gaming to figure out if this happens, then how would we react to that? We are a global company, so we are seeing some uptick in soybeans out of Brazil, for example, because China are buying Brazilian beans. So we try to, with the assets we have, think about war gaming, how we'd react to some of those changes.
Interesting. Well, let's turn it over to the audience and hear what's on their minds and what types of questions they have. So who has a question they'd like to hear from our panel, our esteemed panel? Dick has a question.
To the extent you hire business graduates, what skills do you find that they're bringing? You've said some of them. And importantly, which ones are they not bringing? What are they untrained in that you wish they would be trained in?
I can start. I mean, some of the technology pieces that was mentioned before are really important. Coming into areas like data science, some of the technology changes in agriculture. Some of the things that I personally wish they would come in with is a little bit more patience, because quite frankly, they're looking for the next role. And I think there is something to be said for longevity in role, at least maybe 3 or 4 years versus that 18 months. So just thinking about their contribution, the length of that contribution and the impact of it over time would be what I would ask for.
So I actually think about it a little bit differently, at least in my field. To find somebody who's well-trained, whether it's in technology or business or other core principles from education, I don't think it's that difficult, at least for us. I have stacks of resumes. What I'm looking for in this environment is the open mind, the flexibility, the entrepreneurship, because I really think those are the skills that are going to be critical to help people succeed in this very fast-changing, globalized, high-technology world. And that's what I want to see, and really the emphasis I would put on, and I think that, I'd give a little kudo to Dean Taylor with his background and his globalization and his push towards internationalization and entrepreneurship. It's just fantastic, because that's what we're looking to do. And right now, to be frank, and we've hired a few undergrads from Olin. I'd rather have an Olin undergraduate business school student than anyone else in the country, just because I feel like you're getting the smarts, you're getting the training, the open-mindedness, the entrepreneurship, but also you're getting that Midwestern, kind of going back to values, that Midwestern values as well. It's a bit self-selection, but if somebody is saying, hey, I want to go to St. Louis, or maybe I'm in St. Louis already, I'm going to go to school here, you're getting that just kind of more down-to-earth, more humble, Midwestern type person, which really works very well in our organization, right? We don't want people that are very arrogant or self-promoting or self-centered. So that's what I look for, is really flexibility, open-mindedness, entrepreneur.
Interesting, more intangibles there. Munir?
So unfortunately, the two spaces I'm in, supply chain, it's not a sexy industry. So even we pay high, but we don't get the graduates from good schools. We do get them as interns. And the other is media, where we do get graduates from good school, but they have very strong opinion. And today, content, which is extremely important, easily available, you can't have very strong opinionated from a 23-year-old or a 24-year-old. To answer your question, I do meet the Olin students almost every year, every alternate year, and I've seen a very refreshing change in the last 1 or 2 years, from everybody wanting to join a consulting company or a bank or one name brand. I had the most fascinating interaction, and we met at a startup or a technology-based company this time, and the students, and you wanted to engage, and they were open, and it was absolutely fascinating. So something is happening, and I feel that that's important, because there's only so much McKinsey and other people are going to hire. So that's important, and the interaction is important with us and with other people in the industry.
Before we go, Zach, what before you said you need expert generalists. What does that mean?
So expert generalist is someone like, I've heard some people say that what Steve Jobs was also. He was just not a technology person. He had a design aspect to him.
Gotcha.
And what's happening is that you just cannot be boxed into, in a company today, one way of thinking. And you need all these specialists, which people are, and we just heard about very deep specialization. I mean, I would never have thought of that.
Right.
But you need that, because otherwise we will be hungry, as the gentleman said. But expert generalist today, from a business school perspective, and in light of the business school perspective or the organization I'm associated with, it's important, because you need to know even how you're going to handle a legal matter, but not in the traditional way. A design matter, or like I said, if you're in a technology company, how do you hire a musician? There are acquisitions going on today which may not make sense to your regular portfolio of companies. So you need to have, instead of super specialization, or you're coming for an MBA finance or an MBA marketing, or you need to start studying about expert generalist, and you will probably start hearing about this terminology as we speak and in the next few years.
You're giving us a heck of a challenge here at Olin, I think, to train these people. Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be redundant. A lot of what others said is true in my view as well. I do think more and more, people from every part of the business world need to speak technology and data. They need to speak it. They don't need to be experts. They don't need to be technologists necessarily, but they need to be able to speak it. And I think, frankly, technologists need to start speaking more business and think about the problems of strategy and business and so on. So I think that the facility in those respects is important. I do think that agile learners, growth mindset, those kinds of qualities are huge. But the other thing that I'm looking for, frankly, when we're hiring people or elevating people is, I think about the challenges that Munir spoke to. Those are real. Futurists aren't talking about 50 years from now. Many of them are starting to talk about 5 or 6 years from now. Who is it that comes to the table with a critical lens, a willingness in humility to challenge the status quo, a willingness with some level of confidence to think that they can help guide us through these very fast-moving waters? Those people, again, who have good sort of relational qualities as well, and who aren't looking to steamroll over everyone, but those who are willing to sort of help us navigate that, those are the talents and the qualities of people, frankly, that I think if Olin can continue to invest in, I think they will be most successful.
So we have a place for everyone, perhaps. One thing that I think is an exciting thing that we have starting here at Olin, along with the engineering school, it fits a little bit of this, is a new joint degree program. So instead of enrolling in the Olin Business School or the School of Engineering, next year, I believe it is, we're going to do a joint enrollment in computer science and business, and you'll become a student in that program. And I think that will train some of these mindsets. It's a fascinating thing. So if you have kids that or know people, send them our way. I think it'll be a fascinating program. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. Yes, sir.
I want to point this at Zach. You're the person anchoring this team that has a perspective on the built environment, a perspective on the Midwest and St. Louis. It's, I think, unique. How do you assess, how does your experience in St. Louis with regard to the built environment, with regard to the Midwest, how does it fit into this conversation? How do you tie it together?
That's a great question. But I can see it tied together, and we have spent considerable time with a lot of folks here investing in the built environment, finding ways, candidly, against market dynamics to fill old buildings with new people and to create a kind of energy in that space. And yet, again, the reality is that we are still here in town, I'm going to say treading water or maybe losing ground. And that is, to me, in part, and this has been frankly a realization over the last maybe 5 or 10 years, a realization that unless we think about attracting talent that is open to and that is really not just open, but is embracing new ideas, new ways of doing things, challenging the status quo and the ways things get done here, the market's just not working in our favor. And we have been, as you know very well, from a built environment, really pushing, a boulder up a hill for 25 years. And that's because a lot of the most agile talent that we've been talking about is going to places where they feel most embraced, and I think where their creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship gets supported. I think we have an opportunity to flip that script, flip that narrative, to think about, candidly, our issues in this town with race and inequities and racial disparities. Those are the kinds of things that I think if we might think about those as opportunities as a region, I think suddenly those buildings get filled a whole heck of a lot faster and candidly in a more sort of electric and energizing way.
Great. Well, let me just conclude with a couple thoughts then. And first is, despite people coming from very diverse backgrounds, careers, et cetera, I heard a lot of commonalities in terms of their experience, the importance of values, the importance of globalization, and so I think the direction Dean Taylor's taken us sounds to be very productive. The second thing, despite maybe a gloomy scenario for the future, what I'm excited about being in the classroom with the students, again, many of whom I see here today, I think they're up for that challenge, and to really kind of lead us forward into that. And so the path that each of you have walked at a different point in time, I think you've been inspirational to us, but I think the people who are coming after you are going to, sitting in those chairs maybe 20 years from now, are going to look back and say, we did it. And thank you for being an inspiration to us, and I hope the audience will join me in again, celebrating these individuals. Thank you so much.
Perhaps I can just conclude by actually echoing perhaps some of the remarks that Kurt made there, that a lot of the panelists talked about culture. And we talked about values, and we have these values hanging upstairs. And really, it's a matter of how we interpret those values that gives us the culture. And the culture that Olin is. And each of our panelists here this evening, so this morning rather, displays, I think, that Olin gene of, I guess I would put it as displaying a kind of leadership that achieves excellence in a highly competitive environment through collaboration, right? And I think that is something that it's the identity of what Olin Business School is. So, one of the things I haven't changed here are those values hanging upstairs: integrity, leadership, diversity, excellence, collaboration. Because you don't change your values, right? And so, in a sense, we have this new, in some sense, strategic vision, values-based or data-driven, values-based. But it's really just recognizing what we've always been doing, right? And I think we've been at perhaps one part of being these Midwestern values, which perhaps hasn't served us so well, is humility, right? So we need perhaps to say a little bit more about who we are and our identity. But I found that a really, really enlightening and enthralling discussion. Thank you so much. And I'd like to remember to congratulate Ling and Darai on your achievements of the Olin Award. And I look forward to a great evening this evening and to celebrating with you. Okay. See you soon. Thank you.